Welcome Wargamers back to the Mortal Realms, and today we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite characters that GW has ever written, and that is, of course, Teclis. He has a few different surnames or titles, Arch-Mage, Mage God, but the one that we've settled on for his war scroll, I believe, is the Illuminator. He is one of the twin gods of Hysh, along with his brother, Tyrion. These two are characters that span all the way back to the old world and even, kind of ancient times in that setting. They're extremely old. Because in old world, elves could live for an extremely long period of time naturally. These two were integral in the Elven Civil War that saw their homeland of Ulthuan divided. And the Elven nation as a whole split into what we knew as the Light, High Elves, Dark Elves, and Wood Elves. For all intents and purposes, they were heavily involved in that conflict. They weren't part of instigating it per se, but they clashed with the Dark Elves a lot. But to be honest, I'm not going to cover his old world lore beyond that, because not that it's not cool, but because I already have so much to talk about, and many other channels have done bigger dives into his background than I could ever hope to do. But we will pick up his story as he enters the AOS setting. Teclis awoke next to his brother Tyrion in Hysh, the Realm of Light. Together, they are the twin deities of this place, just as Alariel is the goddess of life and Nagash is the god of undeath. They embody the realm and were able to kind of shape it. Light magic being concerned greatly with illumination, understanding, wisdom, logic, protection, healing, things like that. And while there was a time of thanksgiving for their survival after the end times, this early history was dominated by sadness and loss. For it was the end times that saw the overwhelming majority of their race destroyed, all the elves consumed by Slaanesh. Their days were spent in sorrow and, for Teclis, deep meditation and lamentation. There was a surge of hope when Sigmar appeared while traveling the realms. He had found some elves and done what he could to protect them. What few numbers there were existed in Azir and a few other places here and there. But those elves were in no rush to leave their homes, which was fine by Teclis. There wasn't a big enough population to restore the elves to their former glory, and he just wanted to know their species yet lived. And to put things in perspective, everything we're going to talk about right now is in the age of myth. Teclis did not sit idly. Like with many other gods, he shared his gifts and power with mortals, not just elves, but all mortals, helping them reach the unparalleled heights of magic and technology and society that the Age of Myth was known for. Teclis in particular founded colleges, including the basis for what we would know as the Collegiate Arcane, or at least kind of put that system of learning there to kind of spur that on later. Places of learning and study, how to use magics to construct things and make the world a better place. He even gifted Sigmar with something remarkable, a device known as the Enlightenment Engine, an arcane machine that fills anyone in a considerable area with an incredible ideas and inspiration, basically the illumination of Hysh brought to the other realms. What would normally take an architect decades to learn would be grasped in an instant. This saw the Age of Myth reach its true zenith. Cities and schools of impossible size and magnitude were constructed, and through reason, wisdom, and learning, the future was very bright. We now know that Sigmar would go on to intentionally corrupt and reverse these Enlightenment Engines to shroud his storm vaults in mystery, which is a kind of pseudo-betrayal that Teclis never forgave him for. And all this is going super well. Teclis is very involved in making life happen to its greatest capacity, and then he gets distracted. In secret, Teclis meets with Tyrion, Malarian, and Morathi, and they discuss the possibility of recovering their lost kin from the old world. Sort of. Teclis is instrumental in creating the prison that will house Slaanesh. And if you want to know more about this prison, be sure to check out my lore videos regarding Slaanesh. I go into a lot of detail about how specifically they chained him up. But we've covered it quite a bit between, Daughters of Cain, Slaanesh, even the Deep Kin a bit. I don't want to go into it too much, but basically they capture Slaanesh and bind him. This prison is a combination of light and shadow magic. Morathi is used as bait, and Slaanesh soon becomes imprisoned for centuries. Now I want to point out that this process was not fast. Every chain that binds the god of excess was crafted one by one. It took an extreme amount of effort and time. The reason this is important is because this is when Teclis largely begins to withdraw from the Pantheon. Not that he's no longer, on the same team, but he's just preoccupied. He's sort of like a project lead on catching Slaanesh, and he's getting more and more busy with it, and then kind of losing touch with what's going on in the realms. In fact, the gods had all busied themselves to the point where they failed to see which way the winds were blowing, so to speak, that the eternal powers of chaos had begun to find a way into the realms themselves, to twist and destroy them subtly at first, and then in huge ways. It was still the Age of Myth, but no one was looking or was on guard for the enemy. During this time, the first souls to be pulled from the mouth of Slaanesh were divided amongst the elven gods, along with Morathi. The first portion that Teclis received filled him with this unparalleled hope and excitement. This would be a chance to restore the glory of a lost age, to walk among his people again. The souls were carefully formed and looked after, vessels created to house them, and they were taught all manner of high elf culture, right? Music, art, magic. But there was something wrong with Teclis' new children. There was this darkness inside of them that even the light of the big illuminator could not pierce through. In a word, trauma. These were the first souls taken out of Slaanesh, and they were ultimately damaged. They despised Teclis' teaching. They struggled to remain civil. Whatever happened to them in Slaanesh had put like a permanent blight on them, and soon another flaw began to appear. Their spirits faded over time as if there was a hole in them and they were just kind of pouring out. Looking at his creation, Teclis was filled with grief and disgust in equal measure. These elves, these Idoneth Deepkin, as they'd later be known, saw what was happening and decided to run in fear of their creator. They dashed out to the deepest parts of the ocean to hide and eventually form great kingdoms. It was only Tyrion who was able to convince Teclis, don't go hunt and exterminate them, let them live or die on their own. Which, on one hand, sounds nice because it sounds like mercy, but on the other hand, it's equally a jerk move. Because what he's really saying is, let the realms and other mortals deal with it. And I like to think this whole thing was very hard on Teclis emotionally, right? Yeah, it's never expressly said so, but the lore in the Lumineth Realm Lords does have him crying over the loss of his people, and so there is some emotional element to this. But whatever heartache there may have been did not dissuade him from trying again. He was determined the elves would live again as they once had. His next attempt was far more successful. True elves, healthy and whole, were born again, and using the same technology and teaching that saw great cities of Man and Duarden cover the lands of the realms. Teclis and Tyrion worked hard to bring their new children a great life. Soon their culture, power, and arcane might well surpassed what was achieved in the old world. And this is really the peak. Okay, we're still in the Age of Myth. It's what they dreamed and hoped for ever since the day they awoke in the realms. Slaanesh is on lock, there's elves everywhere, it's basically like Ulthuan times 100, life is super good. And in a tragic repetition of themes, Teclis becomes distracted with other affairs. Now we're not exactly told what these specifically are. He could be working with Sigmar on something, or he could be away pulling more elves from Slaanesh, out, fighting and warring to keep people safe. It doesn't really matter, he's just not around. His people fall prey to their own hubris, nearly destroying themselves in what would be known as the Spire Fall. We talked about this during the Lumineth Realm Lord Week. Teclis returns to his people with the solution. Like I said, I've already talked about it, so I'm just going to quickly recap it here. He helps them rebuild their land, their kingdom, and themselves as a people. This time is known as the Reinvention, and during this time, Teclis finds a way to heal the fabric of the realms, essentially to close doors that lead to the realm of chaos. In the event of the Spire Fall, large weapons went off, there was tears in reality torn, and so Teclis found a way to basically heal the land, get it all back together. Now armed with knowledge, he takes his warriors, now known as the Lumineth Realm Lords, out among the realms, attempting to cut off chaos by essentially sealing it away, right? Closing all the doors so no more can come in, and then we'll just deal with what's locked in, so to speak, later. And along this journey, he communes with an ancient spirit known as Selenar, who is the Sphinx mount that accompanies him. And that pretty much brings us to the present as far as, important narrative beats that Teclis has been a part of in the Age of Sigmar universe. So I want to talk a little bit more about why is he cool. We mentioned a lot of things about Teclis between the Lumineth Realm Lords week and the Deepkin week, so if you want to learn more about him and his character, go ahead and watch those series. But why is he cool? Why is he important? Put simply, he's just involved in the setting a lot more than some other characters are. To start off, the Enlightenment Engines. We covered this quite a bit when I was talking about Storm Vaults as a concept. That there are these machines that, if you are in any proximity of it, you're just the best version of yourself. Things that seem untenable all of a sudden are now within your grasp and you can do them. Like I mentioned before, the architect who all of a sudden masters something that should have taken 10 years of learning. He was instrumental in building up civilization not just for his own elves, although of course he was there, but just for mortals everywhere, establishing the schools of magic to make sure that this discipline isn't lost. And lots of books, when I'm talking about in our world, like when we look at different battle tomes for different armies, there's a lot of referencing to scholars in Hysh. Even things like the Beasts of Chaos book has, Hysh scholars are trying to figure out the origins of these guys, and then there's also Hysh scholars researching the Bad Moon. There's scholars researching the Seraphon. Like they're just smart people who are always trying to learn more, and he established that as a cultural basis. Now, for my favorite part, he exemplifies the flaw in his own people. This idea of saying, I know what is best, so I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to ask you for help or permission. And this plan that I've just come up with may involve hurting you in some way, but promise it's for the ultimate good, the greater good of the realms. But everyone else is just a pawn, and I don't owe you an explanation. That doesn't jive well. That's not really a team player mentality, if you will. It's arrogance. It's the same kind of arrogance that led his people to the Spire Fall, but now we're trying to kind of channel that into different ways. And he was the same kind of way in the old world, but like magnified, right? And that's something I've loved about all the AOS gods. They're super fallible. It's just a character that existed before, but then magnified 1,000-fold. He specifically wants to recreate an empire of old, which I found interesting because, I'm looking at the other, non-chaos gods, right? And they certainly have guided culture for sure, but I can't remember wanting to recreate a carbon copy of a society that existed in the old world in particular. Can maybe give shout outs to Manfred and his little, slice of Shyish as far as recreating the old vampire layers of old, that kind of thing. But I can't think of another god who's this was best. This is the best archetype. Even though it ended in disaster, it doesn't matter. I'm going to say it's the best, and this is the course that I am going to put my people on. Again, very, very arrogant, and I absolutely love it. It's bad logic, but when you, have deity level powers to make it happen, I don't know, I guess it just seems like a good idea. If you haven't picked up on it, he's all about magic. He's all about arcane weaponry, about defense, offense when it comes to magic, anything like that. He is the ultimate book nerd of the mortal realms, and I absolutely love him. But friends, I'd love to know your thoughts on Teclis. If you are a old world, Warhammer Fantasy Battle player and you like Teclis, go ahead and tell me your favorite story that involved him, because there are quite a few books and obviously the different editions of the High Elf book that kind of paint different pictures of him, but I'd love to know a favorite scene or a story that he's a part of to kind of get people excited for Teclis. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I look forward to seeing you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.